What happens when two comedy legends clash on live television in the most explosive confrontation late-night TV has ever witnessed? You won't believe what unfolds when Jimmy Kimmel's interview with Conan O'Brien spirals completely out of control, leading to a dramatic walkout that has the entire entertainment industry buzzing. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds when these two comedy titans go head-to-head in what can only be described as television chaos. The atmosphere in the Jimmy Kimmel live studio was electric, as the cameras rolled for what was supposed to be a friendly reunion between two late-night veterans. Conan O'Brien, the towering redhead who had conquered late-night television across multiple networks, settled into the guest chair with his characteristic awkward charm. The audience was primed for laughs, expecting the usual banter between colleagues who had shared the same television landscape for decades. But something felt different from the moment Kimmel opened his mouth. Instead of the warm welcome typically reserved for fellow comedians, there was an edge to his voice that sent ripples through the studio audience. The planned questions seemed to carry an underlying current of hostility that made even the production crew exchange nervous glances. "So Conan," Kimmel began, his smile not quite reaching his eyes, "tell us about your new travel show. I mean, it's interesting how you've had to reinvent yourself so many times after, well, you know." He let the sentence hang in the air like a loaded weapon, the implication clear to everyone in the room. Conan's famous eyebrows shot up, his lanky frame shifting uncomfortably in the guest chair. The reference was obviously pointed, a dig at his tumultuous exit from The Tonight Show over a decade ago, a wound that had long since healed, but apparently not forgotten by his host. The audience sensed the shift immediately, their laughter becoming more nervous, more uncertain. "Well, Jimmy," Conan replied, his voice maintaining its trademark wit despite the obvious barb, "I've always believed that comedy is about adaptation. Unlike some people who seem content to stay in their lane and never push boundaries." The words were delivered with Conan's signature smile, but there was steel underneath the humor. The temperature in the studio seemed to drop several degrees. Kimmel's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, his knuckles whitening as he gripped his index cards. This wasn't going according to the pre-interview script, and everyone could feel the tension crackling between the two men like electricity before a thunderstorm. "That's fascinating," Kimmel shot back, his voice dripping with barely concealed sarcasm. "Because I seem to remember someone who couldn't even hold on to the most coveted job in television for more than 7 months. But hey, at least you found your niche with the college crowd, right?" The studio audience fell completely silent. This wasn't comedy anymore, this was personal. Production assistants frantically gestured from the shadows, trying to signal for a commercial break, but Kimmel seemed determined to press forward with his assault. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every uncomfortable second of what was rapidly becoming television history. Conan's famous composure began to crack, his usual playful demeanor hardening into something more serious. "You know what, Jimmy? I think there might be some confusion here. I came on your show as a colleague, as a friend. But it seems like you've got some issues you need to work through that have nothing to do with me." "Issues?" Kimmel laughed, but there was no humor in it. "The only issue I have is with people who think they're better than everyone else in this business. You've always acted like you were above it all, like the rest of us were somehow beneath your Harvard education and your sophisticated humor." The accusation hung in the air like poison. Conan's face flushed red, not from embarrassment but from rising anger. His long fingers drummed against the armrest of his chair, a nervous tick that his longtime fans recognized as a warning sign. The Conan O'Brien they knew and loved was about to disappear, replaced by someone much less patient and far more dangerous. "I never said I was better than anyone," Conan replied, his voice low and controlled. "But I've never had to tear down other comedians to make myself feel relevant. I've never had to rely on cheap shots and petty jealousy to get laughs." The words hit Kimmel like a physical blow. His face darkened, and for a moment, the carefully constructed facade of the late-night host completely slipped away. What remained was something uglier, more vindictive than his audience had ever seen. The studio lights seemed to dim as the confrontation entered new, more dangerous territory. Jealousy! Kimmel spat, leaning forward in his chair like a predator, preparing to strike. You think I'm jealous of someone who couldn't even make it work at NBC? Someone who had to crawl to cable television just to stay relevant? The insult was designed to wound, and it found its mark. Conan's entire body went rigid, his famous smile completely vanishing for the first time since the interview began. The audience could sense they were witnessing something unprecedented, something that would be talked about for years to come. But as the tension reached its breaking point, neither man seemed willing to back down, setting the stage for an even more explosive confrontation that would push both comedians past the point of no return. The silence that followed Kimmel's latest attack stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Conan sat motionless, his pale complexion now flushed with anger, his hands gripping the armrests of his chair so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. The studio audience, initially confused by the hostile turn of events, now sat in stunned silence, realizing they were witnessing something far more serious than a comedic roast between friends. You want to talk about crawling, Jimmy? Conan's voice cut through the silence like a blade, each word measured and deliberate. At least when I left NBC, I did it with dignity. I didn't spend years making desperate attempts to stay relevant, by copying better comedians and hiding behind a desk, making the same tired jokes night after night. The accusation struck Kimmel like a lightning bolt. His carefully maintained composure finally shattered completely, revealing the seething resentment that had apparently been building for years. Better comedians? He snarled, his voice rising to a level that made the studio microphones crackle. You mean the comedian who couldn't even beat Jay Leno in the ratings? The one who had to take a massive payout just to go away quietly? Conan's laugh was bitter and harsh, completely devoid of his usual warmth. There it is. There's the real Jimmy Kimmel everyone's too polite to talk about. The guy who spent his entire career being second choice, always wondering why he never got the respect that other people in this business earned. The words hit their target with devastating accuracy. Kimmel's face contorted with rage, his professional mask slipping away entirely to reveal something ugly and vindictive underneath. The production crew stood frozen, unsure whether to intervene or let this unprecedented confrontation continue to unfold on live television. Second choice? Kimmel's voice was now a growl, barely controlled fury radiating from every syllable. I'm not the one who got fired from his dream job because he couldn't handle the pressure. I'm not the one who had to reinvent himself as some kind of quirky internet personality just to stay afloat. Fired? Conan shot back, his own voice rising to match Kimmel's intensity. I walked away from that disaster because I had principles, something you clearly wouldn't understand, considering you've spent your career kissing up to network executives and playing it safe with the same formulaic garbage. The studio atmosphere had become electric with tension. Audience members shifted, uncomfortably in their seats, some looking toward the exits, as if they wanted to escape what was rapidly becoming an all-out war between two comedy legends. The cameras continued rolling, capturing every moment of what would surely become one of the most talked-about incidents in late-night television history. Kimmel stood up from behind his desk, his entire body trembling with barely contained rage. Principles. You want to lecture me about principles? You're the guy who took millions of dollars to disappear quietly instead of fighting for what you claim to believe in. You sold out just like everyone else. You just did it with more self-righteous posturing. The accusation was devastating, and Conan's reaction was immediate and visceral. He shot up from his chair, his towering frame suddenly imposing as he faced down his host. I never sold out, he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper that somehow carried more menace than any shout. I made a choice to preserve my integrity instead of playing political games with network executives. Something you've apparently never had the courage to do. Courage? Kimmel practically screamed the word, his composure completely shattered. Don't talk to me about courage when you ran away at the first sign of real competition. You couldn't handle the pressure of prime time, so you went crying back to cable where you could play to your little niche audience and pretend you were still relevant. The insult was too much. Conan's face went from flushed red to pale white. His jaw clenched so tightly that the muscles in his neck stood out like cords. You know what your problem is, Jimmy? You've spent so many years being bitter about other people's success that you've forgotten what it means to actually create something meaningful. All you do is tear people down because you're too insecure to build anything worthwhile yourself. The words struck home with devastating force. Kimmel's eyes blazed with fury, his hands balling into fists at his sides. Meaningful? You call that pseudo-intellectual garbage you peddle meaningful? At least I don't pretend to be something I'm not. At least I don't act like I'm doing some kind of public service by telling jokes to drunk college kids. And there it is, Conan said, his voice filled with disgust. The real reason you brought me here tonight. This was never about promotion or friendship. This was about you trying to settle some imaginary score, trying to make yourself feel better about your own mediocrity by attacking someone who actually took risks in their career. The studio had become a powder keg, ready to explode at any moment. Production assistants frantically gestured from the wings, trying to signal for a commercial break, but neither comedian seemed aware of anything beyond their heated confrontation. The audience sat transfixed, witnessing what appeared to be the complete destruction of any professional relationship between these two men. Kimmel's response was swift and vicious. Risks? The only risk you ever took was thinking you could handle the big leagues. And look how that turned out. You're a cautionary tale, Conan. A reminder of what happens when someone gets too big for their britches and forgets where they came from. That final insult pushed Conan over the edge he'd been teetering on since the interview began. His entire demeanor changed, the last vestiges of his professional courtesy evaporating like morning mist. What remained was pure, undiluted anger, and everyone in the studio could sense that the confrontation was about to reach a point from which there would be no return. You know what, Jimmy? Conan's voice was now ice-cold, each word delivered with surgical precision. I came here tonight thinking I was visiting a colleague, maybe even a friend. But I see now that you're just another bitter, small-minded person who can't stand to see others succeed where you've failed. The words hit Kimmel like physical blows, and his reaction was immediate and explosive. Failed? Failed? He shouted, his voice echoing through the studio. I'm the one with a successful show that's been on the air for over 2 decades. I'm the one who didn't get kicked out of my job by my own network. Conan stepped closer to Kimmel's desk, his towering height suddenly intimidating in the cramped studio space. Success? Is that what you call this pathetic display? Ambushing a guest with personal attacks because you're too insecure to have a normal conversation? This isn't success, Jimmy. This is desperation. The studio audience had gone completely silent, some covering their mouths in shock at what they were witnessing. Security personnel had moved closer to the stage area, clearly preparing for the possibility that this verbal confrontation might escalate even further. The cameras continued rolling, documenting every moment of what would surely become legendary television. Desperation? Kimmel's laugh was harsh and bitter. The only desperate person here is the guy who's been chasing relevance for the past 15 years. At least I don't have to pretend to be some kind of comedy genius to feel good about myself. That was the final straw. Conan's face contorted with rage, and when he spoke, his voice carried a venom that shocked everyone who knew his typically gentle nature. You want to know what real desperation looks like, Jimmy? It's a grown man so threatened by other people's talent that he has to resort to cheap shots and public humiliation to feel relevant. You're not a comedian anymore. You're just a bully. With a microphone. The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Kimmel's face went through a spectrum of emotions: rage, hurt, and finally a kind of desperate fury that made him look almost unhinged. "Bully? Bully?" he screamed, his voice cracking with emotion. "You arrogant piece of garbage! You think you're so much better than everyone else? You always have." "I never said I was better than anyone," Conan replied, his voice now deadly calm. "But I am better than this. I'm better than whatever this disgusting display is supposed to be. And I'm certainly better than sitting here listening to a washed-up hack take out his professional frustrations on me." The insult was devastating, and Kimmel's response was immediate and unhinged. He came around from behind his desk, his face red with fury, pointing an accusatory finger at Conan. "Washed up? Washed up? You're the one who couldn't even last a year in the big leagues. You're the cautionary tale that agents tell their clients about what happens when you get too big for your britches." Conan had heard enough. His famous composure, already stretched to its breaking point, finally snapped completely. "That's it," he said, his voice cutting through Kimmel's tirade like a knife. "I'm done with this circus. I'm done with you, and I'm done pretending that this is anything other than the pathetic tantrum of a jealous, bitter little man." The studio erupted into chaos as Conan began removing his microphone pack, his movements sharp and decisive. Production assistants rushed forward, unsure whether to intervene or simply document the unprecedented breakdown happening before their eyes. The audience sat frozen, witnessing what would surely go down as one of the most explosive moments in television history. "Don't you dare walk away from me!" Kimmel shouted, his voice breaking with a mixture of rage and desperation. "We're not finished here." Conan turned back to face his host one final time, his eyes blazing with contempt. "Oh, we're finished, Jimmy. We've been finished for years. I just didn't realize it until tonight. The difference between us is that I actually cared about comedy, about making people laugh and bringing joy into the world. You? You just care about settling scores and feeding your own ego. You sanctimonious piece of—" Kimmel began, but Conan cut him off with a gesture that somehow managed to be both dismissive and devastating. "Save it for someone who cares," Conan said, tossing his microphone pack onto the guest chair with obvious disgust. "I've wasted enough of my life listening to bitter people blame others for their own shortcomings. I won't waste another second of it on you." The tall comedian began striding toward the stage exit, his long legs carrying him away from the disaster that the interview had become. Behind him, Kimmel continued shouting, his voice becoming increasingly shrill and desperate, as he realized his guest was actually leaving. "This is exactly what I expected from you," Kimmel yelled after him. "Running away when things get tough, just like you always do." Conan paused at the edge of the stage, not turning around but speaking loud enough for everyone to hear. "The only thing I'm running from is the stench of your failure, Jimmy. And frankly, I should have done it years ago." With that devastating final blow, Conan O'Brien walked off the Jimmy Kimmel live stage, leaving behind a studio in complete chaos and a host whose reputation would never recover from the night he decided to wage war against one of comedy's most beloved figures. The cameras captured every moment of Kimmel standing alone on his stage, his face a mixture of rage and dawning realization that he had just destroyed his own career on live television. The audience sat in stunned silence as the credits began to roll over the most explosive confrontation in late-night television history, a moment that would be replayed and analyzed for years to come as the night Jimmy Kimmel revealed his true character to the world.